Hi, guys. I'm Alexandra Harbushka, founder of Life with Herpes. As always, I'm excited for episodes. I'm really excited for this episode because we have a previous guest on our show back again. We have Elisabeth Kristof, and she was back by popular demand. We did a podcast, it was probably maybe 3, 4 months ago. And the Life with Herpes community has had such an amazing transformation from it, have been asking lots of questions. And Elisabeth is an expert in the nervous system. So definitely I will link the first episode that we did where you can go back and listen to it. I would recommend that. But if you aren't listening to that one, let me just introduce you to Elisabeth so that you can get to know her like the rest of the community has gotten to know Elisabeth. But she is an expert in the nervous system with health for trauma resolution and behavior change. So as you're listening to this, you might go, well, what does this have to do with herpes? Where are we going with this? And the nervous system, herpes lives in the nervous system. It lives along our nerves. And so this just goes hand in hand together. She is the founder of Brain-Based Wellness. It's an online platform that trains the nervous system and body to resolve old patterns, improve performance, and increase well-being. She also is a co-host of a podcast called Trauma Rewired that teaches you about your nervous system and how trauma lives in the body and what we can do to heal. She's been working since 2017 with entrepreneurs, athletes, leaders, and just helping people manage their stress and like we kind of talked about, rewiring and relearning how the brain handles trauma. So I'm going to hand it on over to Elisabeth just to take the stage. I've been looking forward to this for the last couple of weeks since she's booked. So let's get into it. Welcome back, Elisabeth.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me back and for your community, for being so interested in all of this. And I'm really excited to have this conversation today. I'd love to just go even deeper into
Okay.
some of the science, especially around shame and stress.
Shame is we don't realize what shame does. And it's a strong emotion and it's one that we swallow and we just put a mask on and go. Or we just sit there with it. We just sit in our puddle of shame. I heard a great quote the other day in my secret society support group. It was actually yesterday. So I think that this is going to resonate with you. I'd never heard it this way. She said that when we swallow shame and just hold it back, it actually is holding back all of our other emotions. So it's holding back happiness, joy. So we think like, oh, I'm just gonna shut this down and just keep going. But it basically shuts us off. And this is where you're at.
Yeah,
So
shame is a wild emotion to think about because it is an emotion that represses other emotions, which is just kind of a weird thing to wrap your mind around.
right.
But it's really important any kind of with any kind of diagnosis or any place where we feel like our social connections are being threatened, there's a component of shame that comes with that. So it's really particularly important for this community to have a deeper understanding of shame and some ways to work with it, because like you said, it's really important to be able to process that shame and move out of that shame response through the body. I
Mhm.
think the most important thing we have to understand first is that shame is a protective emotion. It comes up to put the brakes on situations, to actually physically put the brakes on our body and our expression, especially where we feel like our social connections might be severed, where we might get socially isolated. It's protecting us from that pain of rejection or abandonment or neglect. And we have to remember, especially as children, but as human beings in general, connection is a survival need. We need other humans and other nervous systems for co-regulation and emotional expression and protection, even food and shelter when we're young. So keeping social connection is a survival need. And
Mhm.
shame is part of our body's response to keeping that survival need protected.
And here, a lot of times when we have shame, especially, I mean, I can talk specifically on herpes, is it isolates us. Usually when we go
Mhm.
into shame, we go into isolation. Like I'm embarrassed and I don't want anybody to know what I'm going through. And so I'm just gonna, I can't, I don't have a poker face, so I'm just gonna hide and go into a basement.
Yep, that's another kind of crazy thing about shame is it's trying to protect us from isolation and abandonment and keep our social needs met, but it often, almost always, ends up with more isolation and not getting those needs met. And especially if we think about like when we're developing, so to kind of make sense of how shame is protective, if we develop in an environment where, say, we experience neglect, emotional or physical, that activation of shame, can become really hypervigilant, really hypersensitive, so that we're primed later in life to move more quickly into that emotional response, because we learned, like, I shouldn't speak up and voice my opinion. I shouldn't express my emotions because I'm going to be punished or sent to my room, or maybe other kids will reject me when I'm being expressed or acting in this behavior. And so shame is really linked with freeze response. It inhibits the expression of other emotions through the body. It takes away our vocal abilities. So my vocal cords lose activation, all these horizontal fibers in my body lock up. And now it's keeping me from saying the thing that might lead me to be rejected, or from taking an action because my body is immobilized. And so it's really an emotion is a physiological event that happens in our body, and our body has real outputs, real reactions to that emotion. And some of that is to really shut our system down, so we lose mobility, vocal ability, all of that,
Wow.
moving
It
into
like
like a
it goes on to
freeze state.
lockdown.
Hmm. Yep.
Wow.
And another part of that protective response too is all of our trauma responses are, um, they're linked to our immune response. They're linked to inflammation, because they're preparing us to be potentially harmed, right? As stress comes into the system and our body is still preparing for that fight, or to have to run away, or to be hurt by a predator. And so with these protective responses, there's very, very physiological components to that. And part of that, with shame especially, is an increase in inflammation and an increase in immune activity, because our body is preparing for potentially being harmed or having like an invader of some sort. And
So
so, go ahead. Yeah,
our immune system is preparing. So would that mean it's heightened, or would that mean it's just
it's
it's all over?
heightened.
Okay, it's
It's
heightened. Wouldn't that
heightened.
be a good thing?
Well, that is, yes, it is. Both inflammation and immune response are good, in like an acute moment where we really need that to protect ourselves, right? And so the problem comes when we are in a chronic state of having that
Got it.
response occur, because again, maybe that shame sensitivity is heightened, so we're constantly moving into that response, constantly being shut down and immobilized and producing inflammatory proteins. There's lots of studies that show that shame is correlated
Hmm.
with elevations in pro-inflammatory cytokine activity. So cytokines are just small proteins that help the body fight off infections. And so you can actually see an increase in these with an individual experiencing shame. And so we know inflammation increases. We also know that the immune system increases. But if we have that going all of the time, then we're actually, one of two things is going to happen. That's either where you start to get autoimmune, or where your system becomes really depleted and you can't fight off infection, virus, cancerous cells. So it kind of can go two different routes.
Wow.
Um,
So are you saying that people in general that develop autoimmune are probably dealing with a lot of shame?
I definitely think so. And
Okay.
there's many books. Gabor Mate would be a great resource for this. When the Body Says No and the Myth of Normal, looking at how trauma is linked to shame and also emotional repression all play a huge role in disease states later on. And it may not always come from shame, but there's definitely a component to that. And so if we're in, it could also be, a heightened stress response moving into some of the other trauma responses, but anywhere where our immune system is getting really overactivated all of the time,
Mhm.
the way that it works is our immune system is starting to send out cells that look for invaders when it's getting the signal that there's a need to protect itself, right? So it's sending out cells to look, find, and destroy invaders. But if that's happening all of the time, our body is almost being trained to look and look and look for something that's attacking us. And as those cells get sent out more, eventually they start to find things.
To attack
And
that
that
don't
could be
exist. Yeah. That's
our
the
own tissue.
autoimmune. Okay.
It could be proteins like gluten or some other thing that we don't that isn't actually harmful, but it could also be our own tissue, our own nerves, and that's what autoimmune is.
Wow. Wow. I
Yeah.
just had all so I'm just so there's so many people that say I have autoimmune and I don't know that much about it other than it's the body attacking itself.
Yeah.
But really there's no treat like if you were to go to Western medicine doctor, they would just say, "Oh, here's an autoimmune drug."
They would suppress your immune system
They would
because
just
they give you
suppress your immune
immune
system.
suppressants, right? Which then has all kinds of other ramifications, right? So if our body's in this heightened state all of the time, our body and our nervous system are always adapting. What we do, we get better at, and it's learning to go more frequently into that response. And as it gets triggered again and again, it's going to send out these scouting parties and of inflammation. It's like, I'm not finding anything. I'm not finding anything. And then it gets the signal, go again. I'm still not finding anything. Go again. I'm still not finding anything to attack. And so
Meanwhile,
eventually
the
it's going
message is
to
coming
start to
like
attack
attack,
something.
attack, attack. You have to attack.
Yes.
I'm okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So
Got it.
eventually it's going to find something to fight against. And then down the road, if that happens in a chronic way, an ongoing, recurring way, eventually it can become our own body tissue. And then again, it can also go the other way, right? Because we've been experiencing this type of emotional distress and physical stress within our body. And we've been moving into this immune response over and over again. Eventually, we can also deplete the immune system that is supposed to be fighting off these foreign invaders or cancerous cells or a virus. And so you can also lead to the place where you have a really depleted immune system and you're more primed to get disease.
You just walk down the street and you're like the Scotch or like not I'm gonna say Scotch ball, but you're like a sticky. What are those games when like you would throw the sticky ball? Like you just feel like you're walking around trying to collect everything. Like just throw it on me.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, it's like that. And it can really become this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy of like internally the system is interpreting and responding as if something bad is going to happen. I better go find it. And eventually you will, because it's either attacking healthy tissue or it becomes so exhausted that now the immune system is vulnerable. The body is more vulnerable to having disease. And then it further dysregulates the system, and it just kind of goes on and on until we learn ways to work with the nervous system to repattern that response in the body and to rehabilitate this reaction that's occurring over and over again.
Ugh. I wish everyone could hear this message, but I especially want people living with the shame associated with herpes to hear this message. If we don't find a way to deal with the shame, just swallowing it isn't going to handle it. If we don't find a way, it literally will eat you alive.
Yeah, yeah, and swallowing it, like, it just doesn't work that way because it's none of the stuff that is happening at a cognitive level. It's not really our cerebral cortex deciding like, oh, I want to lose my vocal abilities. Oh, something really bad is going to happen to me. I need to fight off this invader. It's happening at a subconscious level. It's happening in our brainstem, in our amygdala, in our thalamus, all these things that are not in the cerebral cortex. They're taking in information and they're deciding before it even makes it to your consciousness how you should react to protect yourself, to keep yourself safe.
Hmm.
And so trying to like cognitively override this response, you can maybe if you're really good at it and you've adapted, you can maybe shine it on like you are, but all of that stuff is still happening inside of your body. And then many of us eventually we can't shine it on anymore. And we get really shut down by
Yeah.
it. And we don't understand, why can't I use my voice? Why can't I move in these situations? Why do I have this freeze, this shutdown, this collapse in these situations? And it's because of the way that our nervous system and our brain has been patterned over time to take in information and the threat level that is being associated with all of that.
So how somebody know that they're at a heightened alert? What are some signs that someone could say? Because we not even know. Like I'm listening, I'm like, I think I've definitely been there, but I think I'm doing okay now. But hey, I could be blind to it, and you might list off some things, and I could be going, oh, I have some work. So,
I think the best way to know, especially without having to like cognitively know, like I was talking about, is to really look at your physical outputs. Like, what is the quality of your sleep like? Are you waking up at 4 a.m. every morning? Like, can you fall asleep? Can you stay asleep? Can you get like real quality rest? How frequently are you getting sick? You could use your outbreaks as an indicator
mm,
of the current level of your nervous system and immune function. And you could also look at, maladaptive behaviors. I like hesitantly use the term maladaptive because all of our behaviors are our brain and our nervous system's best way that it's figured out to get us out of that stress state, to calm us down, to re-regulate us. So it might be eating a bunch of food, it might be drinking alcohol, it might be scrolling on social media. In that moment, your survival mind is like, okay, good, we're safe. We're reducing the amount of stress coming in through these behaviors that we've learned as
mhm.
coping mechanisms that work to get us out of that high stress state that leads to disease. And so if you find yourself in those behaviors and you can't stop, it's because your system is the stress load is too high and it's looking for a way to reduce it.
Wow. You can see I'm thinking. Those of you that are listening, not watching, like the everything is moving in my brain. So it's wow. It's so it's like you said, it could be drugs, alcohol, food. You can't get out of bed.
Overtraining,
Oh,
poor sleep, anxiety attacks. Like these are all just signals to your nervous system, like, hey, my stress bucket is overflowing and all these things are happening inside and it's not good. It's not good for the system and the body. We're moving toward disease. I'm gonna find a way to reduce the stress load. And your brain will use these different behaviors, these different outputs to get that to occur. So if it feels like, man, I know better, I have done all this work on myself, I understand all these things and I just can't get out of that cycle. Something is like driving me. It's our operating system, it's our nervous system, and it actually might be in some ways beneficial because that stress load does need to be reduced. So you can't even really take away those behaviors without having new ways to work with the nervous system,
oh
process
wow.
emotions, and relieve stress, because then you're going to be stuck in that stress state. And we don't want that either.
Wow. So would like some examples be also like procrastination? Like I just can't do my homework. Like I sit down, I stare at it, and I just can't do it.
100%.
Wow.
Procrastination is an avoidance behavior. Uh, and the thing that we're avoiding is stress, right? Like at the root of 75 to 90% of disease, depending on what study you look at, I would say more than that, maybe, it is stress. It's the dysregulation of the nervous system and the impact of the hormones of stress on the body, the impact on the immune system, the impact on inflammation. And so yeah, when I have that thing that I can't make myself sit down and do, it's because in my body, my nervous system, it's saying like, I cannot handle the stress of this. Do not put
Interesting.
one more thing on me. I just can't.
Wow. Yeah, I'm just thinking of like myself too. Like there's times I'm like, oh, I just need to sit for like 10 minutes and just scroll mindlessly through social media. And I'll set my timer and I'll do it for 10 minutes and then I'm done and I feel better.
Yeah, that's actually really healthy. Yeah.
Okay,
It's
great.
really healthy allowing yourself to have something. It's not bad to like sometimes, be like, I'm gonna binge a Netflix show or two. I'm gonna give
Mhm.
myself some time to check out and disconnect. And then of course it can reach that point where when we aren't able to work with our stress and reduce it, where those maladaptive coping behaviors can start to add more stress onto the system because they lead to harm, right? Like if we're drinking too much, it's having an impact on our relationships, it's having an impact on our body, obviously, if we're scrolling all of the time and then we're letting the
Right.
stress build up from the other things we want to do. We're not present with the world, we're not present in our relationships. And so there does need to be a way to work with the system to move out of some of those behaviors. But like a 10-minute, I'm going to do this and I know that it works for me, is like, I think it's completely fine.
So what's the difference between the person that says like I work best under pressure? I like to get to that pressure point because then I know I get it done. What would that be a sign of?
Well, I think we are, when we're in a heightened nervous system state, a sympathetic nervous system state, we are more alert. We're
Mhm.
more like our senses are heightened. We're taking in more information. And for some people working in that state, you do feel like you have like more clarity, more focus. Everything's firing, everything's turned on. The problem with that is that that also is just not a sustainable state. And so if we're always pushing ourselves into that heightened state, heart rate is also getting elevated, respiration is getting elevated. You do have the stress hormones of adrenaline and cortisol, which have all kinds of other impacts on the body and the nervous system, especially if it's chronic, like with cortisol.
Mhm.
And so you can lead yourself to having, adrenal dysfunction, adrenal dysregulation, where you become really depleted because of going into that state all of the time. You can also um, pattern that behavior into your nervous system life so that you're always craving being in that state. And
Mhm.
then you're creating stress for yourself, which isn't
Mhm.
optimal. And so like if you work best like that and you can do it and then discharge the stress and you have the ability to re-regulate and come down and really rest and recover after, then it's okay. But when we don't have that and we're just constantly pushing ourselves into that state, then it's going to be problematic.
Wild. Oh, so many great things. Again, I hope that this message just gets out to millions and millions of people because this is how we live. We don't know any better. And from what I'm hearing is like there'll be little knocks on your door that are like, "Hey, you're really tired," or "Hey, what weird, you got 3 colds this month." Like, and you go, "Oh, well, I was out," or whatever. And then maybe you shame yourself for getting sick. Well, I shouldn't have gone
Right.
out. And
Yeah.
I shouldn't have, whatever it is, I shouldn't have gone to the birthday party. I knew better, whatever it is. Um, wow.
And then you're just creating more of that response in your body with the shame. Or so much of the time we shame ourselves because our capacity, right? Like I should be able to handle all of this. And, that really disconnects us from our body. We already live pretty disconnected. And so we'll ignore a lot of those signals for a long time because we don't want to feel the shame of not having the capacity to do all the things that we think we should be doing, which then pushes that stress load up.
Mm. I just heard another message there, how you're saying, like, I should be able to handle this. It's also like, well, I should be in a different spot, or I should have known better by going on this date, or I should have used protection, or I shouldn't have dated this person, or I shouldn't. So we can really should ourselves to anything. And then it's just a vicious cycle.
It is. And one of the biggest components of healing for me and of the clients that I work with is getting to a place where we really can on our own capacity
Mhm.
and be like, yeah, like I want to do like 20 live events and be on all these podcasts. But the truth is for me that I have to be a little bit more selective about it. It takes a lot of energy from me. There is a stress load with it every time. I have practices to discharge, but if I push too much, I'm going to get a migraine. I'm going to burn out. I'm going to eat in a way that I don't want to, for self-regulation.
Mhm.
All these things that I know are going to be the inevitable consequence of going beyond my body's capacity. And so getting to a place, having the tools to regulate my nervous system around that acceptance, and then just being like, yeah, this is where I'm at. This is what my body's telling me. And I'm going to start to create a life that's more in alignment with that. Is otherwise I can't really heal if I can't start to listen
Mhm.
and hear that.
As you're talking, it's reminding me of being pregnant. And I can remember, so in general, I have noticed that my body likes to have one day of just nothing. Like I don't want to go out. I just want to kind of lounge around my house, maybe cook a very good smelling meal and just be really home. And I can remember when I was pregnant, if there was a weekend that didn't happen for whatever reason, my body would just like the next Monday or Tuesday be like, you're not getting out of bed. And it forced it. And I think it was obviously saying this is so important because you are pregnant, you're not getting out of bed. Um, and so it was its way of just saying, no, no, you
Yep.
don't understand, Alexandra.
Yeah.
This is what we're doing.
Yeah.
Um,
Being pregnant is a heavy load on the system. You're, creating a whole little life
right.
inside of you. And so, yeah, and that is just a perfect example of the nervous system in the body overriding and being like, enough.
Right.
That's
This is what
enough.
we're doing. Where
Yeah.
now I feel that I'm not pregnant, I still will like I can overwrite it. But as I'm learning, there's gonna be a day where it's like, no, you're not gonna overwrite it.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
So what are some steps? Let's talk about shame specifically, especially for us dealing with herpes. And then I'm sure we're all, listening going, oh wow, I didn't realize the shame of, oh, I should be able to be doing more. I should this, I should that. I should be able to be at a different spot in my career. I should be married. Should have graduated college. Let's take those aside right now. Let's deal just with a herpes diagnosis because that is the most, it's the one on our platter. What are some steps that people can take to deal with
Yeah.
that shame?
So the way that I work with shame, the way that through neurosomatics we work with shame is we don't cognitively try to figure it out, right? We're really going about it working with the nervous system directly through sensory inputs. The nervous system, that's the language that the nervous system speaks. It doesn't understand English or French or German or Spanish. It speaks through sensory inputs. So, what I'm going to do in those moments is start to create different inputs to change the physiological reaction inside of my body. And then I can experience a new output. So the first thing is recognizing it, like you said. So when you're hearing those, start to identify like what are your thought loops that come when you're in a shame response. What are the shoulds that play? Or for me, a lot of times shame is in an emotional flashback. And when I am in an emotional flashback, there's one telltale sign I have, which is this voice that thinks it has always been this way and it always will be this way. Like
Mm.
whenever I'm looking at things like, I'm always like this, or this always happens. Like the truth is, I know that we're changing all of the time. We're neuroplastic beings. I'm never stuck. But when I have that narrative of always has been, always will be, I'm like, I'm in an emotional flashback. Shame is probably a huge component of that. So starting to identify like,
Mm.
what are the things, and then starting to identify how does that feel in my body too. Like, do I get really heavy feeling in my body? Do I get puffy with that inflammation? Do I start to lose a little bit of my voice, my vocal abilities? Does my mouth dry out? Do I get some brain fog? Can I feel my feet? Like when I can't feel my feet, I'm disconnecting from my body. And so learning the somatic signals that are coming to help us recognize that that's there too. And then starting to create little bits of different sensory inputs. So one of the things that's hugely connected to shame is dissociation, when we're cutting off from the signals of our own body. And so if I can just get a cloth or something that's not my own skin and give my feet some sensory stimulus and be really present while I'm doing it. I'm just rubbing my foot. I'm trying to feel each of my toes, the bottom of my foot. If it feels okay, close my eyes and create a picture of my foot in my mind and just like be thinking like, this is my right foot. Maybe mobilize the joints of the foot a little bit. Do that on the other side. Place my feet back down on the ground and see like, okay, now I've given some sensory inputs into my nervous system. I've helped my brain clear up that map of where my feet are in space. Do I feel my feet more? Am I more grounded? Am I still in my body? And just by coming back to the body and using that sensory stimulus to come out of dissociation, I'm starting to move out of that
Mm.
freeze shutdown.
Wow. Wow. Okay.
Another one, I'll give one more that's I think really important too, is when we're freezing. I'll give two more.
I love that.
When
I mean,
we're
yeah.
yeah, because I think it's really important to have practical, actionable tools to start to work with this.
So we're saying, just I want to clarify and go back. So we're saying that shame associates most with the freeze, or can you have fight or flight?
So this is really interesting.
Okay.
This is a good question. I'm going to try not to go too deep into this, but
Go deep.
shame is it is initially immobilizing, and so
Okay.
it's linked with freeze. But true freeze, the trauma responsive freeze, is very short. It's think about like if a car is approaching a deer and for a second it freezes, and then it takes another action, right? Like freezes that moment that comes when our system is deciding what to do, and we decide, am I going to fight? Am I going to run? Or in if there's no escape, then we do collapse. We go into tonic
Mhm.
immobility. So shame might initially trigger that freeze response. And then for some people, that might be linked with a real quick pivot into fight or into flight, that's the well-worn pathway. So they feel that initial immobilization of freeze, and then all of a sudden, I got to get out of here. Nobody's talking fast enough. Nobody's moving fast enough. I can't be in this space anymore. I got to just close down my computer and get off of this screen. I don't want to be in this conversation anymore, right? All these flight
Mhm.
responses start to kick in. I need to get out of here. It could be fight, like they feel that initial freeze and then all of a sudden they get really defensive and really combative
Mm.
and move into that well-worn pathway. And then for many people with especially developmental trauma history, the total shutdown is the well-worn path, because if it happened when you're a kid, you often can't run and you can't fight.
Right.
So your body just shuts down to disconnect and keep you safe from experiencing whatever it is that you're going to experience. And then it would be like I move into real immobility. I'm very heavy. I can't move. I can't speak well. And really any of those could be linked, but the most linked is the shutdown.
Okay. Wow.
So with that
Yeah.
being the most linked, one of the best ways also to start to come out of that shame response is with a little bit of movement, a little bit of
Mhm.
mobility. Even if you're moving into fight or flight, that'll also help discharge the stress. If you're moving into fight or flight, you might want to do some more like kind of vigorous activity to complete that stress cycle. Maybe take a walk or do some loud vocalization. But if you're feeling really shut down and it feels hard to move, we still want to move a little bit so that we get fuel and activation to our frontal lobe. We get some fuel and activation to our motor cortex. So you can do something really simple, like circling your fingers really precisely, just making a circle with each finger, and just some really intentional, precise movements to start to get that fuel and activation to the frontal lobe and the motor cortex. Again, it'll connect you back to your body, and it can be really small, subtle movements. It can even be like, I'm going to tap my finger, each finger to my thumb and just try to be really coordinated with it, and just making your brain and your nervous system create a movement pattern. Doesn't
Mm.
have to be big, but it'll help change how things are firing inside your system. And then the last thing would be doing some vocal toning, right? Bringing some activation back to our vocal cords. So just like doing a scale, going as low as you can, humming, and then going as high as you can and back down and trying to smooth that out and just spending some time making some vocalization, even if it's pitchy or it has gaps in it, just slowly working through that to try to bring activity back. It'll also help stimulate your vagus nerve, which is always great.
Mhm.
And some pretty like easy, short, not overwhelming things that you can do when you're starting to feel that come on, and then see if it starts to interrupt that cycle, and then you feel different and you start to react differently.
So you can be more in charge of what's happening. You can just start to tell your body, it's okay, you're safe, I got you. And then you can start to move through it.
Yeah, I mean, really what we're doing with neurosomatic tools is we're developing an understanding that our system is constantly adapting to the stimulus coming in. And when we understand that and we understand how it takes in stimulus and how that impacts our system, we can start to have some agency, like you were saying, to start to have some control over what are the inputs that are coming into my system. And in the moment of stress or in the moment of shame or in the moment of reactivity, can I create some different inputs intentionally for my system that's going to change the way that it's working and cause it to respond differently, adapt differently to this situation. And then over time, by continuously working with your system to provide it with new and different inputs in these moments, we're repatterning how we respond. We're changing the reaction that is wired to those specific triggers or inputs.
That kind of got me thinking when you see someone or if you've been or you've seen it in movies or maybe whatever, when someone goes through trauma, real trauma, like a car accident, or they find out, you see in movies like the police officer shows up at your home and says that your spouse has or someone's, no longer there. And you literally can see the person, the trauma shake. That is that your body's natural way of saying, I got to get this out.
Yeah, we're really meant to mobilize stress. That's part of the whole stress cycle. And you see with animals too, right?
Mhm.
When an animal has an event, they get in a little conflict or something, and then they'll shake.
Shake it out.
They'll shake their body and discharge that stress. And there's all kinds of signals that are happening from our body up to our brain that then help our brain know, okay, this event is over. We can stop producing all of the adrenaline and the cortisol. We're completing the stress cycle. Otherwise, we're not completing the stress cycle and we can stay in that really charged, activated state. And so that's why it's really great to move, because we're then giving the signal to our brain, like, okay, it's time to start modulating back now into more of a parasympathetic, more rest and digest state. We can relax, we can come down from this.
And for us dealing with herpes, where it wasn't a physical blow, it wasn't a physical, it may have felt like the wind was taken out of you. You may have felt like a shock, but um, there's nothing physically, you didn't physically get hurt, right? It's an emotional, like it's a shame. It's truly the shame.
It's an emotional stress, but it's important to remember at the level of the body and the nervous system, stress is stress. So the same hormones are going to be released, the same reaction is going to occur inside of the body, as if there is a physical threat, right? So I have a
Oh.
couple areas of my brain that determine threat. There's the amygdala, that's our little almond-shaped threat
Mhm.
detector, and it's always deciding, like, do I need to turn on a stress response or a trauma response? Do I need to move into this protective mode? And it will work with some other areas to create that response. We have our thalamus, which is taking in all the sensory information and deciding like what needs to make it up to the frontal lobe. Am I safe? Am I not safe? And whether or not the brain is determining unsafe because of a physical threat or an emotional threat or a social threat, the same reaction is going to occur. It's going to have the same effect on your
Mm.
HPA axis, the same hormones produced, the same muscle tension, the same increase in heart rate. And so even if the stress is emotional, like in that moment of diagnosis, that stress still needs to be processed through the
Wow.
body, not just worked through cognitively.
That got me thinking, is there such thing as a good stress? Meaning, let's say it's your wedding day or you're a kid going to Disneyland or some, and you're just like, this is the most exciting thing ever. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I'm so excited. Like I can't contain it. Is that
Yeah.
the same thing in your body?
Yeah, it is. And excitement and anxiety and stress are all like super, super related to each other. It kind of is the same as when we were talking about the immune response and the inflammation. It's not bad that we have those
Okay,
things sometimes. That's actually like a healthy, well-functioning body. The problem is when it's chronic, right? And
got it.
so having that stress about something, we need stress. Um, we need stress in order to adapt. If we don't ever push our system into stress, we won't adapt to that stress, and then we're not growing. We're not, getting, when you exercise, that's a little bit of stress. And then if you have it at the right dose, at the right amount, your body adapts and you become stronger. And
Right,
so you don't want to live a life that's void of stress, because then you're never going to be growing and adapting. And it's also impossible to live a life without stress.
right.
So when we talk about nervous system regulation, we're not talking about like being flatline and calm all the time. We're talking about having the ability to modulate between a sympathetic state, an activated state, and a parasympathetic state where you can rest, recover, and positively adapt to that stress. So as long as we have a nervous system that's good at shifting between states, it's good to have stress, and you're going to. The problem is when we start to lose that ability to modulate, to move from one state to the other, and then we can't adapt to the stress
Right.
anymore. And when we don't have the tools to discharge the stress and re-regulate, then that's when the system stays in that chronic stress state and can have all those other long-term effects.
Then that's when we get into the autoimmune. That's when we get into cancer. That's when we get into chronic disease. That's when we get into chronic inflammation.
Yes. And
Oof.
everyone's going to respond differently to stress. Everybody's capacity is a little bit different. And so, especially this can happen during development, right? If we're primed into those states of hypervigilance, of detecting a lot of threat, those responses are going to be kind of patterned into our unique neuromatrix. And so the same event, the same stressor is going to have a different impact on different people, because some people perceive it with a lot more threat. Some
Mm,
people have a lot more emotional repressive mechanisms built into their bodies. Some people really don't have the ability to discharge it. They're already coming in a really high stress level. And so it's just really important to remember everybody's capacity is different. The way everyone adapts to stress is different. And the same event, even a positive event, like planning a wedding and being really excited about it, someone that has a lot more threat
mhm.
coming into their nervous system because of the way that they're wired, or maybe they already had a high stress load before this, they might experience that, but then get really sick after, or experience a migraine, or be really burnt out and shut down, even though it was something they really wanted to do. And
Got it.
so it's always different for everyone.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. I have been completely just, I mean, our first podcast, like I was talking about, guys, definitely go back and listen to it. Even if you have listened to it, please, again, it's going to be linked. Go back and listen to it just to get reassociated with how this works. I'm still like going, oh, that makes sense. Or, oh, I do that. Or I see people do this, we all have our own little tick, I guess, would be a way, or like you said, we all have our own uh pre whatever I'm trying to say,
Yeah, I know.
pre
We have all have our patterns
our
in our
patterns.
nervous system, the way that we're
Hmm.
shaped from our
Hmm.
environment growing up, our relationships, all of it. It
Right.
lives inside of our body and our nervous system. And, it shapes us and how we respond to the world now. And if we want to move beyond some of those patterns and responses, then we do have to take some time to rehabilitate the nervous system, to work with the system so that a new response becomes possible.
I love this. So how can person listening right now get in touch with you? What's the best way for them to talk to Elisabeth?
Yeah, the best place to find me is on brainbased.com. And we actually do 2 free weeks of nervous system training, a 2 free week trial of our membership where we teach so many of these tools. And we have a huge on-demand library. So you can come experience this, internalize it in your own body, and see what it feels like to work with your nervous system. So if you go to freeneurotrial.com, you can get 2 free weeks of nervous system training there. And then if you're a coach or a therapist and you want to use these tools with your clients, we also have a certification course for coaches and therapists, and that's at neurosomaticintelligence.com.
That's wonderful as well. I can see that wherever you're at on your journey, I think step one is listening to this. Step one is listening to part one. Step two is listening to this podcast episode, and then definitely spending time on brainbased.com, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Just
Yeah.
making sure I didn't drop off a wellness. Brainbased.com.
We shortened it to make it easier for people.
Okay. Brainbased.com just to feel your way around and sign up for your 2 free weeks and get involved. I am going to make a bold statement that saying everybody that's been diagnosed with herpes needs this. I think everybody needs it, but us, our community, we have to stick together and we need this. We need this to support one another. And I'm sure listening, you're like, wow, I need this. But you know what? I also have my friend that needs this. Or wow, I'm thinking of a relative that needs this. Or oh my gosh, if only someone could have heard this. Or if I could have heard this 5 years ago when I don't know, an aunt was dealing with autoimmune or whatever. This is such an important message that we're not hearing. And it's your due diligence to take care of yourself, right? It's your body. You have to take care of it. You have to respect it. And if you don't respect it, and someone else isn't going to respect it for you. So number one, do it for yourself and do it for the people that you love and the people that are around you and the people that you can also support them, be an advocate in their life.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that.
All right. I used to ask this question on past podcasts and it dawned on me today and I had forgotten about this question. Because smell is a very important scent, but it's a very important part of our lives. It really creates a root. I'm like, which way do I go with this question? What does a regulated nervous system smell like to you?
Oh, that's a great question. It's funny because what comes to my mind is the smell of a dysregulated nervous system.
Well, what's that smell like?
I don't know if you have this, but when I am anxious or fearful, I have like a smell. I can be like, I smell like fear.
Yes.
And it is those fear hormones of adrenaline and cortisol moving through my body, and I'm sweating it out. I'm sweating those hormones out. And so there's like this smell of fear. And I can smell it if I do like something that's really activating to me or stressful. And so I would say like a well-regulated nervous system just smells like a nice, clean, fresh human body that is feeling safe. And I don't know, I wouldn't think of it as like having really a whole lot of smell. Just kind of someone's natural scent.
I love that. I didn't know where you were going to go with it. If you're like, oh, it smells like I don't know, a nice walk along the beach, but I love
maybe nature, like
nature.
Feeling the smell of nature, of being out in nature. That definitely reminds me of a well-regulated nervous system.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I know what you're talking. Like you can smell stress, or I can smell when someone's sick, or like if my son's about to get sick, I'm like, oh, he smells sick. Even if he hasn't come down with it, I'm like, oh, you smell different. I can tell it's happening.
Yeah.
And
I took the question very literally.
I love it. No, it's true. It is true. People smell differently based on the hormones that are going through their body. And It's funny. We were talking, for those of you that are listening, I went skiing this morning. And so Elizabeth, the first thing she said was like, how's skiing? And it's funny, when I walked in, my husband gave me a hug and he's like, you smell like you were skiing. Like you
Hmm.
just, it just, there's like that,
There's this, like a smell.
just
Yeah.
smell. Yeah. He's like, you just smell sun-kissed and fresh air. And I was like, wow, great. Thanks.
Yeah, that seems like a regulated nervous system
There we
too.
go. All right,
Beautiful.
friends. Well, I will link everything for you. It was amazing to have Elizabeth on again. I can't thank her enough. And I'm just going to say that. Thank you, guys. Definitely
Thank
listen to
you.
that. You're welcome. Everyone needs to hear this message. And I will see you all soon into the next episode. Have a blessed day, everybody.